Right, good evening everyone and welcome to this Euractiv event, which is kindly supported by PSE, the transmission system operator in Poland. Today's event comes just a few months after an agreement was reached on the clean energy package and the market design proposal that was part of it. And as usual, the attention now is focusing more on implementation, but also stock taking what was actually agreed, because we're talking indeed about a massive package of legislation which contains quite a lot of detail. So how far have we gone in reforming Europe's electricity markets? Does the new market design actually represent a leap forward in terms of how electricity is traded in Europe, or are we talking more about just baby steps? These are some of the questions we'll try and address today with our speakers, starting with Sebastian Gras, in charge of networks at the European Commission's DG Energy. And then we'll have Leszek Brzezin, Director of International Cooperation at PSE, and Pascal Fong from ENTSO-E, the Network Transmission System Operators Association in Brussels. Welcome to all of you for joining us today. We'll start this conference by hearing a few introductory statements by our three speakers, statements which should not be longer than 5 minutes, please. And then we'll open the floor to your questions or remarks. It's an open debate, so please don't hesitate to raise your hand, challenge the panelists or ask questions. I'll try and take as many of them as possible. One last detail, this is an on-the-record debate, so anything that you say could be quoted in a forthcoming article published on Euractiv. And to add a little bit more pressure, the event is also being live streamed on the internet. I think this is mostly for our Polish colleagues so that people in Poland can follow us, but obviously anybody in Europe can access that, or actually indeed in the wider world. So I guess that's all for me. Sebastian Gras, the floor is yours for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Frederick. First of all, very welcome to everybody here. Great for your interest in power trading and the legislative work that was done jointly by everyone and that we are now to implement. Thank you for honoring me that I am in charge of the networks unit. I have to say I'm a policy officer only, so I will already push away the responsibility for me. No, we are dealing with networks in our unit, and therefore we are touched, but we are concerned about what happens on the trading side. We are concerned about what happens with the market development, but we are also concerned about what happens on the infrastructure side with regards to the necessary infrastructure that we need. And I hope that I can give this exchange and this discussion also a bit of an infrastructure twist, because from preparing this event and from the main topic that I read from the invitation, I thought, well, this is a lot about trading, a lot about optimization, but if there is no hardware, there's no trading. So in the end, we have to find some solutions which work for both ways. So for me, it's always those communicating pipes between the markets and the networks. And well, as I said, I'm from the networks unit, and that's my expertise, my main expertise. With regards to your introduction of whether we do baby steps or whether we do big, huge, giant leaps, I think the clean energy package is a very holistic approach that you not only can see by the page size, but also by the very different topics that are touched there. And the question that was highlighted in the invitation about nodal pricing or zonal pricing is just one small element. But I think the fact that we discuss this element already shows a great success, not necessarily because we needed the clean energy package, but because we need to have this discussion, because it shows that with regards to the energy transition, we achieved already a lot, because without the growing renewables and the ever more growing renewables and the expectation that the renewables will be super dominant and still super flexible, we need to enter this discussion of how to better operate the markets, because otherwise we will have a lot of non-market-based measures that will cost us a lot of money. We see that the markets develop more short-term, and therefore there's a bigger opportunity for efficiency gains, and going into zonal bidding, maybe later going into a nodal pricing, are definitely all means on the pathway to more efficiency. We have removed price caps already to lift the flexibility and reward flexibility, and we have created a level playing field for renewable storage and demand response, and this all leads into giant leaps, I would say, and now we need to bring reality into trading as well. You know the legal basis, it was already mentioned. I was warned by my colleagues to come here and say openly that the bidding zone model is the only truth, is the most best model, and this is what we have in the legislation, and therefore it is the best. They said, well, first of all, you will meet experts which are much more into the technical details, and they will challenge you on a lot of things that you can't answer probably. So that's one element, that's my personal element. But the second more relevant element is that we have lots of academics who demonstrated to us that nodal trading does have a lot of benefits which go beyond the benefits of bidding zones. If Leszek later says, and I hope he will say that, because this is what I read from the PSA position, that nodal pricing is the way to go, I will always say, in theory, you are right. Yet we do have a couple of other limitations that we need to think of. And one is, and I think that is something we should maybe emphasize today, is that it's easy to discuss the nodal model on a theoretic basis, because there it shows lots of benefits, but when we talk about the actual outcome of zonal models, first of all, we have very good examples, but also we have these mentioned limitations that are not in line with the pure theory, but they represent practice, and that we have to take into account. So I think I don't know what the time is. I don't want to stretch it.
Yes, you've reached your 5 minutes already. For
Thanks.
sure, there will be more questions
exactly
asked during the debate. Thanks for setting the scene. Let me turn now to our second speaker, Leszek Zezin.
Thanks a lot, Frederick, and thanks for working with us on this debate. It's been a great pleasure from PSE to be here and try to set a little bit the tone of discussion for the longer time. First, probably two remarks on what have been achieved, and I fully agree with Sebastian that we have deployed large amounts of renewables already into the system, which greens our systems to a large degree. And secondly, it works, it delivers, which is a practical thing. That is an observation of the past that has been the practice of the European Union legislation, that we all work on the bidding zone assumptions. That was a kind of easy first step forward towards two things at the same with the same stroke. The first is the liberalization of the markets from the national into the European, and secondly, the first incentive for deployment of renewables. Now, that has been done differently in different countries, but still this step has been taken. And our thinking at PSE is that we need to think about the next steps, kind of steps behind behind the clean energy package and what is going to be after its implementation. This is going to be delivered, the clean energy package. But what we observe today is that the technology is already on the market base. So both wind electricity and photovoltaics can be delivered on the market basis. If it can be delivered on the market basis, then our assumption is that it's going to be deployed on a massive scale. Massive scale, by our reading, is not 30 to 50%, but it's over 50 until the technical limits of sustainability of the systems are going to be reached, which means 80, 90% or perhaps even 100% of renewables, given an important amount of storage or batteries into the system. So if we imagine a system in which we have 100% or 90% of renewables which are intermittent, which are not under full control of the human being, that we need to have, from our perspective, a different kind of market, a different kind of system that is running on the nodal basis rather than on the assumption of zones or large areas in which we presume that there is a copper plate. So no cost for transactions and transmission system operators able to balance the system at each and every moment in time. We see our experience from the zonal system today as leading us into the large imbalances in the system, which require large amounts of redispatching efforts in order to keep the system in balance. This is to be done. With the given setting of the system, it's not a problem. We all run the system secure. The problem is if we come to this horizon of 80-90% of renewables which are intermittent in the system, and they are dispersed, so they are distributed energy resources by definition. In that system, we need to have a market in which works hand in hand with the security requirements of the system, not in a contradiction to the security requirements or not in isolation with the security requirements. And that system is actually the nodal one, and it's very practical. It also works in the different parts of the world. It works in the United States in a number of places as well. And I'm not arguing about kind of academic discussion, in an academic discussion, which is better, nodal or zonal. These days, it doesn't really matter. That can be solved on a textbook basis. What counts is whether we will be able to absorb the large amounts of renewables in a secure way. And I would argue we will not be able to absorb them securely if it's not run on the nodal basis, which means that the electricity would need to be priced in every location, so in the nodes. We have thought about dividing Poland into, roughly speaking, 3,500 nodes, or 4,000 to be easily calculated. And these nodes can reflect the local generational prices on the marginal basis. And it would be able, this kind of system, to reflect the costs of transmission as well. With this, we would have a full transparency to the market to decide by itself whether it's profitable and useful to actually invest in generation in this particular nodes of the system or not. That would be then when the market takes into consideration the full consequences of its decision to invest. One very important consequence of what we think is, and that will be my last remark, is that we run today's system in Europe in a way that has been designed 2 or 3 decades before, where the day-ahead market is the market for the electricity, which is fine, and it's not a problem at all. It's not a thing to be discussed today. But again, if we think about moving the system as close as possible to the large amounts of renewables, then we need to move it as well to as close as possible to the real time. Because it is going to be at the real time or close to real time that the security of the system is going to be decided on a market basis before any transmission system operator that would come after distribution system operator that will be able to intervene and secure the system. So by saying that, I'm arguing for what we're doing in PSE in Poland, that we are moving the operation of the real-time market into the nodal system. The project has been started last year. It's running. It's being deployed, and we are going to be ready by 2023. So in 2 or 3 years' time, we are going to make it. I hope it's going to be as a kind of pilot for the other TSOs to observe, and whether this is going to be an interesting thing for all of us. We'll be happy to share our experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to see Poland taking the lead when it comes to developing new solutions. Let me turn now to Pascal Fonck from ENTSO-E for a European perspective, probably.
Yeah, so thank you for the invitation to ENTSO-E to attend this meeting today. I am a member of the board of ENTSO-E. Apart from that, I am also active at Elia, the Belgian system operator, but this is not my focus today. Today I'm speaking on behalf of ENTSO-E. So as you know, ENTSO-E is the European Association of Transmission System Operators for Electricity. We are gathering all TSOs in Europe and beyond. And we are driven by, let's say, one objective, which is to make the energy transition possible and accessible to all market participants, and this in an affordable manner. And I would say this is the global ambition of ENTSO-E. By doing this, the TSOs are willing to act in the interest of society. So we are willing to propose solutions that can be used by different types of market participants in the interest of society. So we are trying to take into account different criteria. Regarding your question, was the clean energy package a small step or a big one? I think that our opinion is that it was clearly a significant step. This is something that we cannot underestimate, and I would add on that, and it has been preceded shortly before that by another very significant step, which was the adoption of network codes. There are 8 network codes for electricity which have been developed and adopted, and all of these different pieces of legislation are leading to more and more harmonization, but also more and more focus given to cross-border cooperation. And that is exactly in the focus of what our association is doing, gathering all TSOs, working together, trying to remove barriers and to make, let's say, borders as invisible as possible. So a lot has been done, and we believe that really the progress is really tremendous. Is it the end of the story? Of course not. We still need to work a lot. And the first thing to do is to implement everything which has been foreseen in network codes and which is now coming from the clean energy package. We are busy all days with the implementation of these projects, not only TSOs, but also regulators, market participants, and member states are busy working with us in order to implement that. And so we should not forget that this is still ongoing. We cannot rush for another wave of legislation without thinking of what do we need for the next step. But of course, we need many more things, and as TSOs, we are working, I would say, on 3 different axes, which are related to the scope of our activities, the grid development, our infrastructure, what do we need to do in order to provide the grid infrastructure which is needed in order to allow the energy transition, and for this we have several tasks and developments, and we can come in more detail later. Then the second one is on system operation, very, very important, in order to make sure that the system security is guaranteed at all times, and this includes the supervision of the balancing of the grid. And finally, market facilitation. We are not market participants, but we develop processes, tools, platforms which are put at the disposal of different market players in order to allow them to do their transactions. So we are working on these 3 fields. Apart from that, we also have innovation projects, and in that field, an important ongoing work about what will be next. After the clean energy package, what will we need in terms of market design updates, reforms? Do we need a nodal system at European level, yes or no? What would be the specificities of such a system? This is ongoing work at the side of TSOs. We still don't have a conclusion that I can explain in full details today, but at least the reasoning is taking place also to understand how different kinds of mechanism could work in combination at European level.
Okay, thank you very much, Pascal, for giving this perspective from the transmission system operator. We can now open the debate to your questions. And have the privilege of asking the first one. You partly answered that already. All of you seem to agree that the clean energy package was a significant step forward. But if you were to mention, each one of you, maybe 1 or 2 key achievements which for you was really important, and maybe also 1 or 2 shortcomings, things which you were maybe hoping would have gone more, further than what was agreed in the end. Sebastian Gras, maybe I will give you the privilege as the legislator to say what you think about this.
I think we did a big step with regards to regional cooperation, but we should have gone further. Because, I mean, this is similar to the discussion between zonal, or where we get from political zones to electricity zones to nodes. I mean, on the one hand, it gets more and more fragmented. On the other hand, it still requires more and more regional things because of balancing and because of, well, sometimes the sun shines in Poland and sometimes in Germany, and that's just a question of cooperation. So I think that this is both the biggest, for me, this is a big success, but also something where we should go further.
Could you be maybe a little bit specific in how you believe this could have gone further?
I think it's in general the role of the TSOs can advance further. There's room for them to take more responsibility and to cooperate for more people and with each other more. I would leave it at this point.
Leszek, Jezin, do you agree with that assessment? Would you have wished that things had gone a bit further than what was agreed?
Well, yes and no at the same time, I would say, because it's an interesting observation about the regional cooperation, in fact, because the regional cooperation is a nutshell of a problem, in a sense. And when we say that the clean energy package is already advancing the regional cooperation, that is true, but at the same time we need to observe that there were two voluntary bottom-up initiatives, regional initiatives in the past. One was TSNet on our Central European side of the system, and the other was Coreso in the central western side of the system, which came out of the need and necessity of the transmission system operators to cooperate closely in a meshed grid, because otherwise it's impossible to imagine secure operation of the system without looking into what's going on in the neighboring system. So we worked that together, the Polish and German neighbors and Austrian neighbors and the others, and Coreso is an extremely interesting case at the same time. And no, in the sense that certain paths of regional development may go probably too far. One of the aspects that was clearly debated during the clean energy package procedures was the concept of ROC against the concept of RCC, or regional cooperation centers. And the difference is in fact in who takes the decisions and who is liable by the decisions that are being taken in a case that something goes wrong. And the closer we are to the real time, and the more we need to have secure tools of cooperation, the more acute is in fact this question. And I understand that the step back a little bit from the concept of ROC to the concept of regional cooperation centers was in fact a realization that the ultimate responsibility, or even legal and formal and financial liability for the decisions was not well thought through at the very concept of the regional operation centers. On this we may disagree, of course, but this was not a solved problem in a sense. By giving the tools and the responsibility, the ultimate liability was not solved. So yes, one last sentence: the clean energy package was excellent, I think, in forwarding, in advancing the prosumer's position. So the individual and its ability to work within the system. And I would probably not come that straightforwardly for the nodal system without the clean energy package and its work on the prosumers side, because in fact, every one of us can have its own photovoltaic panel, specifically then it's on the market base these days. So this is going to happen, and that's good. Thank you.
Sebastian Grass, maybe a quick reaction, because I saw you smiling when Leszek Zezin mentioned the issue of liability. Maybe a very quick reaction about this.
This was just from my very past. I mean, the question of cooperation is always how deep does it go, and I didn't say deep cooperation, because that can then lead to really putting people together in one room instead of them being separate. And I was smiling, I think, because this is a level of cooperation that I, as a company, would probably not embrace too much, because it would be a danger to my independence. So that was the reason why I can understand that that there's a certain level where we then disagree.
Of course, the system operators are being asked to do something weren't really doing before, right? So indeed, this is change that brings about something quite new, I suppose. But maybe let me turn now to Pascal Fonck for my initial question. One or two big achievements in your view of the clean energy package, and maybe one or two shortcomings that you would point out.
Yeah. To me, the biggest achievement of the clean energy package is indeed this idea to put the consumer at the center. I think that there are several provisions in the package itself supporting this idea and suggesting mechanism in order to make it feasible in practice. Why is it important? It is important because, as I told, we are willing to prepare the energy transition with an increasing share of renewable in the system. This implies more variability in the way generation is being done, is being injected into the grid, but at the same time we must keep the balance. And so we must have resources, means, in order to make sure that we can keep the balance of the system. And today, usually, TSOs have contracts for reserves with big generators, maybe with big consumers as well, but we were still lacking a way to involve the end consumer or the end prosumer connected to distribution grids. And we think that, so there is a clear need to access these resources, but there were different barriers in order to get access to that. And so we believe that in the clean energy package, there are several provisions which will help, including the provision saying that member states have to make possible the access of all kinds of market participants to all markets. So clearly this idea is one idea that we would like to praise in the clean energy package. Regarding cooperation, and when we discuss about cooperation of TSOs, I would of course agree with PSC that we have no regret with what is written in the package. The package is bringing new ideas on this cooperation, and that is good, including new tasks. But we do not feel that we lack something on that basis. The idea of regional coordination centers is the original one which was there at the creation of Coreso and TSCnet. But I want also to add that in the meantime, in ENTSO-E, we have managed to have the commitment of all TSOs in Europe to work in that system. So there has been the creation of a Nordic regional coordination center, and the same in other parts of Europe. So it is not an exception of Coreso or an exception of TSCnet. It is something which is now in the system. It is becoming the way we work by default. And so the idea has been recognized in the clean energy package. It is good, including the idea to allocate additional tasks to these RCCs. This is still where we need to work in order to implement it, and it will not be done overnight. We still need time in order to make it work, but it is important, and we are in line with the idea. And so we have no regret with what is in the package, and we have no regret about what would be missing on that field.
Thank you for that. Let me remind you that you can ask questions at any moment. I see already two hands raised here. Lady at the back there first.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. I am from the Spanish Permanent Representation. I was dealing with the package, and I have one question, maybe with two possible different aspects. For any of you. You are talking about nodal prices. I remember the discussions, so and I remember the Polish comments. You were looking for these nodal prices as country. But at the end, I don't see a clear provision in the package that really establishes this possibility. So where would you really find the provision to lead to nodal prices? In Spain, we have a system in which we have integrated renewables with just one single price, economic price, day-ahead market, intraday markets. But of course, we have different system operation services. So would you, and this is the second question, the first one is the legal provision, and which would be, maybe ENSO is working on this, but would it be a network code to harmonize the way we approach to nodal prices? And the second one is, how would you implement it? Because at the end, when we talk about different prices, we immediately think about bidding zones, different bidding zones. Or maybe are you talking about system operation services prices? There is more an internal issue. In Spain, we have different system operation services, ancillary services, congestion management, but we don't have different prices. Because at the end, this is the bill of the consumer. So I don't know, how do you see this in practice? Thank you.
So is that question addressed to Leszek Jesian or to anybody else in particular?
Maybe more the Polish part, because maybe you have elaborated more on this. I don't know. But
Who wants to have a go?
Thank you.
Yeah, the clean energy package and other regulations, including the network codes and the first and before the second and the third package, they are designed to make the European market. They are not designed to make the national markets. Of course, that by default stems over the organization of the markets in the various bidding zones, and that is what I have been arguing about the predominance of the day-ahead market over the long term on one side and the intraday market on the other side. But in our perspective, the current development of the current design of the market on which we have the dominance of the day ahead over the other time horizons is a natural part of the development as it was historically over the last 2 decades, in fact, developed in Europe. From our perspective, then the future is a different challenge, in fact. The future is not in choosing one or the other time horizon as the market for Europe or the market for any bidding zone, in fact, but how to keep the system in a secure state on the assumption that there is 80 or 90% of renewables in the system. And from that perspective, the assumption on which we build our approach is that the real-time market, or the one that is, in a sense, behind the balancing, is the one that is going to dictate the future behavior of market participants. Because what is the price close to real time is the scarcity on which the investors and all of us are going to make our investing decisions. In the world that there is a large amount of renewables, not in the world that there is a stable generation from nuclear, coal or gas or whatever. And in that respect, our reading of the clean energy package and the other regulation is that the more it changes, the more it makes our life more difficult in the sense that the transition to the nodal system in the balancing and real-time horizon is an extremely time-consuming effort that to which we need to fine-tune into the particular pieces of legislation from the European perspective. So in that respect, only from that respect, the clean energy package made our life more difficult because we needed to reschedule the project, in fact, domestically in order to take into account of what are the regulations affecting, in particular, the balancing operation of the system. But in the essence of your question, the way I understand, nothing stops us in making it more reasonable than it's already now. Thank you.
I think part of the question was also about how the single prices that for renewables that have been implemented in Spain, is that compatible at all with a nodal approach where you have myriads of different prices potentially coming up on the market, right? Can the two coexist? Or Sebastian Grass, you want to say something about that?
I refer to my introduction, and I cannot compare now the nodal pricing and with what happens in Spain and give you an educated answer on that. That I leave to a TSO to speculate on.
Again, jump into that. I don't see any reason why these two cannot exist hand in hand. Actually, this is a natural part of our project in which we need to imagine a system in which all of the other areas are based on the zones, bidding zones, as a copper plate approach, and our system is going to be run as a nodal, given the myriad of the prices locally calculated. And on top of it, this is going to be different in a different time horizon of the markets. So, in our view, this is not impossible. It makes life more difficult, of course. Again, the perfect world would be for the whole Europe to move to one that is going to absorb renewables in a perfect way. But since this is probably impossible to wait for and impossible to attain at this time, we have opted to have it as a solution that works hand in hand together with the zones that are going to be neighboring zones. How this is going to be possible is going to be in the sense of the time horizon for the markets. It's on the aggregating hubs that we are going to work. So there will be aggregating hubs for certain regions within Poland or covering the whole country. For the intraday horizon, for the day ahead and the longer time perspective, even for 10 years' time, there are power exchanges around the world, in the United States, for example, that work on the 10 years' time horizon, derived from the nodal basis. That is not a problem at all. And then in terms of communicating and trading with the neighbors, it's we are going to work on the net exporting curve. That is a concept in which the nodal system is going to be calculated into a zone, in fact, and that as a zone will be able to make transactions between the market participants across Europe, regardless whether this is going to be the day ahead or intraday. Intraday will be probably the most difficult, but the XBIT is being developed as we speak, and we are going to make it for the second go live as well. Sorry.
Right, I hope this answers your question. What I get from that is clearly we're entering some uncharted territory. There were two more hands raised, a gentleman here at the front and other one there in the middle. Oh, Sebastian Grass, yes, you wanted to...
So, because I would want to react on the legal question as well. I think the picture that came to my mind when Leszek was explaining it was a bit of the Matryoshka maybe. So there's a European model, but what happens within the bidding zone as established is the littler one, and that is the one that Leszek wants to, or PSE, I'm sorry, I don't want to get personal, they want to implement for good reasons. And I think the Commission, I hope that the Commission will also embrace this, as long as it does not interfere with the European market coupling. So, of course, the smaller one still has to ensure that the bigger one can get closed. And also, what is important, and I think it's really important to highlight these very, very different timelines, that we're talking nodal system in the future when there's much more burden from all different angles, while we are at the moment at a point of time where we have an ACER decision to split between Germany, 80 million people, and Austria, also a lot of people, and we are far away from nodal pricing, and we are also for the moment far away from good bidding zones. I mean, we have the review. We know what we should do in order to improve our efficiency, but we're not there yet. I mean, and this is where the infrastructure part comes into play, because some people also want to even, some member states may want to avoid the first step of dividing their bidding zones, or dividing their market area into bidding zones, I'm sorry, for political or social reasons. So I think we are very much here, and nodal is very much over there. But still, if there's a chance that we can test it, and given that it's more efficient and that it doesn't interfere with the other ones, I hope that the Commission would also embrace this, because I mean, as it was said, we have academic evidence, we have technical evidence that on the pathway we are on, it will most likely be more efficient, also more complex, though. It's a trade-off, maybe. I don't know.
We can expect Poland now to be one of the trailblazers, and that's interesting as such, almost. A question here at the in the front, if you have your microphone, yes?
Yeah, my name is Rainer Lüttgehus. I'm EU correspondent for Energate in Germany. I don't know if I have understood everything, but I'm quite astonished that zonal pricing is now put into question. There was in the clean energy package, there was no word of nodal pricing. I didn't find any word. And so that would mean that the clean energy package that will come into force, or has already become into force, will be outdated now. And as far as I know, there is a provision in the electricity regulation saying that the TSOs have to make it possible that 70% of the capacity of the interconnectors will be available for trade by 2024. So otherwise, there will be a new... The Commission can think about a new configuration of the zones. Will this not be enough to resolve the problem?
Okay, who wants to have a go at that? First, maybe to clarify on the bidding zones, is it the end of the zonal pricing system or not, or are we in a transition phase where different systems kind of coexist happily?
No, that's what I try to say with the very, very different time horizons. The current market design we have is set up on a zonal basis, and the market design initiative maintains this approach. And we really think that the zonal framework can work very well, provided that the zones of the boundaries of the zones are set correctly. We have evidence that in the Nordics and in Italy, the zonal thing is working pretty well. The question is, and that's what I meant with my introduction of in theory this is right. If there are other models which are even more efficient or bring more improvements, because you can't be more efficient, and that is an economic discussion, and it cannot only be an economic discussion. And I think with the zonal model is here, but nothing is set in stone when things are developing fast. So we have to, on a technical level and on an organizational level, of course, still have flexibility despite having a legal text.
Pascal Fonck, you want to intervene here?
Yeah, our understanding is that the zonal model has been the assumption since several years now. It was the basis for the target model, which has been taken into account in network codes and also in the clean energy package. But of course, this does not prevent anybody about thinking about the future. Is it enough? Do we need an upgrade of the market design? And this is where our exercise of reflection on zonal versus nodal, what do we want for the future, is taking place. So my understanding is that if we would achieve the conclusion that we need a big step in the direction of nodal, maybe legislation would have to be put in line with that. But this is not yet the situation today. Now, regarding
just to have an idea, when could a situation like this actually arise? Are we talking about certainly not sooner than 2025 or even not sooner than 2030? What kind of time frame do you have in mind?
Well, but in order to answer this, I would like to make the link with the second part of your question relating to the 70% provision, the famous one which has been debated in the clean energy package, and I mean that TSOs had opinions on that. Clearly, our understanding is that it comes from the requests of market participants to be able to use interconnector capacity to the maximum extent. And we hear sometimes the critique that TSOs are too conservative and that we do not allocate as much capacity as we could. And so we understand that this trend, putting figures in the regulation, is coming from this perception of, let's say, the so-called conservative character of TSOs. Of course, at the side of TSOs, we have to keep in mind that we are responsible for keeping the operational security of the system. So it is quite important that we take into account all features having an impact on the grids, including the loop flows and including the aspects on adequacy. But never mind, now there is this system with the 70%, including the idea of having action plans to 2025 for countries where this is not yet possible to allocate 70% of capacity. And so I think one important point will also be to see what is the impact of that? What gives the actual implementation of this provision? And this will take, of course, some months, some years to see. But it is an important point, and we are still, let's say, discussing with the Commission and with ACER to understand what precisely the provision means and thinking at how to implement it at regional level and at European level. And so we think that it will show the implications, more cross-border capacity, possibly increased redispatching costs as well in order to make it happen. But there are probably, I would say most certainly, lessons to draw from these provisions in order to prepare for the next steps.
The consequence is supposed to be more trading across borders, right? Put simply. Leszek Rzeźniak, yeah.
I was always puzzled by 70% because from an operator point of view, any electricity that is in the grid is an effect of transactions. there is no electricity, there is not an effect of transactions. So to allocate certain amount of transmission capacity for certain transactions is actually limiting the other transactions. That's by default, which comes back to, in a sense, an origin to that, which is the split between the Austrian and German bidding zones into two, which was, in a sense, one of the lessons from the Polish-German border, which is supposedly blocked for the transactions, but it's not blocked for the transactions, but it's taken by the transactions. It used to be taken by the transactions that were enacted outside of the these two bidding zones, two being Polish and German. For that case, I mean, only concentrating on what is there. So, in a sense, this provision of 70% is actually limiting the other transactions. Whether this is good or bad, that's another story. But we will all probably have problems with 70%. The matter and the fact is that the 70% is there and needs to be implemented. And as you rightly said in the question, if there is no 70%, the provision is that countries could split. And whether this solves problem, this is going to solve the problem that it was designed to solve. This is an old problem of the old design of bidding zones. I was arguing for looking into the future, a not so distant one, because the photovoltaics without subsidies is on the market basis now. And that is the real problem that we are facing, not the problems of the past, which needs to be solved anyway. Thank you.
Maybe to follow up on the 70%, so as a transmission system operator in Poland, how will that be translated in practice? What are you going to actually do in practice to make this 70% interconnector capacity requirement? How are you going to implement that into practice?
And thanks. That's a long story because we have come from the position of the border, as we call that, blocked for the transactions between Poland and Germany, to short it down. In 2015, and that we had a little bit of a problem in the country with that because we were not able to import the electricity at the time of need. So we have come a long way into a moment of today when we import on daily regular basis quite important amounts of electricity, up to 2,000 megawatts each and every moment in time. You can have a look at the website to observe that. So that's already the evolution of the way the system is being run. That two factors, there were two fundamental factors that allowed that. First was split of bidding zone, Germany, Austria into two, which meant that the amount of transactions that were able to be enacted between these two areas, not to call them bidding zones, were not infinite in theory as they were in the past. They are not infinite in practice these days. So their effect does not affect the other borders, including this border, that much as it used to in the past. The second was the introduction of phase shifters, so the specific ways of transformers to push away power at the time that is needed. But in general, it shows the way to 70%. That is to use more of technical tools like phase shifters, which is difficult to build. But then can be to use more of redispatching tools. That's another technical term, but that's out of the classical wholesale market transaction. Again, it's out of the market in a sense. And thirdly, it is, if not possible to reach to 70%, it's to split into smaller bidding zones. Our answer to this design, to this problem, is in fact to jump into the future and to have a response to two questions, or to two challenges, in fact. The first is an inability of the countries to split, and the second is inability of all of the systems to absorb the large amounts of renewables. With splitting the zones, not in 2 or 3, but into 4,000, for example, we are we are shooting two birds with one shot.
Okay, I think there was one question here, gentleman in the middle. If you can bring a microphone.
Thank you, Professor Linson from the IMNRC. We shall be organising for the 4th or 5th time an Energy Day event during EU Sustainable Energy Week on smart cities, a holistic approach to energy. Pascal, you mentioned the notion of energy transition. You cannot consider energy transition in isolation. You must also consider the political transitions, the cultural transitions, the educational transitions. I mean, there is a need for a holistic and global approach. So what I find a little exasperating or irritating is that, considering that energy is a global approach, why do we limit our discussions to the European bubble? And the second question is collaboration. Yes, well, collaboration requires trust. Is there trust? I'm not quite sure. Thank you.
Let's get Frank, yes?
Yeah. Indeed, collaboration requires trust, and it requires also, I think, if I can add to that, the willingness to depart from national interests. And this is probably a difficulty that we face every day, not only TSOs, but also other instances collaborating with us. But allez, we must face reality. There are big issues such as, let's say, security of supply in electricity, which are still a concern at national level. I mean, a competence at national level. So these are important points to be taken into account. Is there trust? I think that at least between TSOs, there is a history of cooperation which is improved over time. We can demonstrate several achievements which show that we can work together and we can provide results. The first market coupling has been done between Belgium, France, Netherlands. It is now being extended. It is now being the reference in network codes and the clean energy package. Other projects to develop intraday markets and so on show that TSOs are working together, but also with regulators, with power exchanges, with market participants, and so on. So trust is being built and being expanding. Maybe we can face in some situation, of course, difficulties of people not knowing each other, not understanding what is important for you at the other side of the border. This is the difficulty that we all have. So I think that what is important is that we devote time trying to understand what are the concerns of everybody, and this is one of the objectives of an association like ENSUI, putting everyone around the table and establishing a common voice. And I think it is in good way, indeed. I really think it is in good way. Now, regarding your first comment, it is exasperating that we keep the discussion in the EU bubble. Yes. Yeah. What do you mean, that we should go outside of EU?
Well, I mean, the EU forms part of the world. It is not a
No, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what we can say, what we are doing, at least at TSO's level, is to establish good cooperations with our colleagues everywhere in the world, and to learn from best practices, I would say, and to see if these kind of practices can be applied in our specific situation. Regarding the involvement of citizens and populations in more general, this is also an issue that we are facing because it is not a secret that for building new infrastructure, we face the issue of public acceptance. And this is where we do not have the silver bullet solution, but indeed increasing the understanding of the benefits and the objectives for the infrastructure we are building, we think it is essential. And so we are convinced that we have to strengthen the dialogue with authorities, but also populations, in order to make more visible what will be the outcome of all the actions we do. And we believe that the support of European institutions would be more than welcome for this.
Maybe to follow up on that question, you did mention that NSOE actually has members beyond the European Union, right? I think Turkey probably among them. Is there I mean, my question would be, is there a spillover maybe of what is being done here in Europe to the neighboring countries around the European region?
Well, the association itself is wider than Europe. We have countries from the energy community. We have Switzerland in the NSOE, but we do not have TSOs overseas. This is not the situation. But at the side of TSOs, sorry. It is not the intention for NSOE at this point in time, because, you know, NSOE has also a legal mandate coming from the third European directive, where we have to stick to the mandate which was given to us according to this regulation. But I can state that several TSOs in Europe have collaborations with TSOs somewhere else in the world, but also I would say mainly to learn what is taking place there, and to try to expand our expertise in the solutions that we can bring.
Yes, please.
Because just few words, I wouldn't be that pessimistic about the amount of trust, and that's probably a matter of perception of a point of observation that we have, because a transmission system operator like we are in Poland is specifically positioned because it's bordering the neighbors who are not the members of the European Union, and they are not really the members of the family. So, to put it mildly, so from a practical perspective, the cooperation with the Russian and Belarusian colleagues is close to zero. From a practical perspective, the cooperation with our Lithuanian, Swedish, German, Danish, Slovak, Czech colleagues, it's really thorough, and it's going very, very down deep. And just to give you an example, the very roots of the TSCnet is a Polish-German cooperation on the Polish-German border. And it doesn't say that we live in a paradise. Yes, we quarrel with the Germans. We have the really diverging issues, that are quite difficult to solve, as everything that is difficult to solve in European Union, like cost sharing for redispatching. But that's incomparable. That's the world that is coming from the trust. Whether this is enough, that's an open question, of course. Whether this is deep enough, that's still a question to be solved. Whether this can go into the regional cooperation on a real way with the liability issue solved, that's an open question. But it's incomparable when we have the neighbors of a different quality. We are in a family of Europe, and we do things as much as dense as possible, and it is very, very, very dense, in fact. Thank you.
Okay, so there was one question here, lady in the third row.
Susanne Nies from Ensui. I have one comment on Professor Linssen and also one question to all the panelists. Mr. Linssen, the gas but also electricity is network bound, and therefore this idea of having it global wouldn't really work unless you take projects like the State Grid China GateCo has them. But you're absolutely right when it comes to the climate agenda, and I think the Commission, Ensui, the players are involved in these agendas. Take the clean energy package, for example, with the national climate and energy plans, where the governance regulation clearly links it to the well below 2 degree and COP21 agenda. So I think we are... But it's subsidiarity. I wouldn't call that fragmented. Yeah, I would really disagree. I think we are in Europe quite advanced on the global agenda, but we are on the local, on the regional, on the European agenda where it's more suitable. I think that's the reality. It would be my view. Yeah, and then I have a question to the panelists on this interesting discussion that started on nodal, zonal, bidding zones and things. Yeah, but all in all, this is about investment incentives. Yeah. And where do you see the investment incentives for next generation to be rolled out? We see in Germany coal phase out, nuclear phase out. So at some point in time, you need to reinvest. On clean tech, what is it? Is that the CO2? Is there a need for a carbon price? Today it's 25 euro a ton. Is it nodal? How do you see the investment incentives coming?
Who wants to have a go at that? Sebastian Graf.
Yeah, it's about incentives, and it is also about acceptance, I would say, because there needs to be acceptance for new generation, there needs to be acceptance for new infrastructure. I mentioned infrastructure once. We are all three infrastructure people. We haven't talked about infrastructure so far, which is a pity, because the problems we are solving and the 70% and everything is connected to problems that we have in infrastructure, which unfortunately is not materializing because we haven't reached the level of acceptance that we need, maybe. Because I don't think it's because somebody doesn't want to construct a line, but it's just hard to further connect ourselves, apart from doing a pure interconnector, maybe. What we have is we have the emission trading system, and this is, I think, the tool that is the tool of choice. I know there are other discussions, but that's the normal process, and I see that the ETS is working better and better. I remember once talking to someone who said who was part of the team who introduced the ETS, and he said, well, we knew when we installed it that it's not perfect, but it is a great start and we can improve it along the way. And then let's go back to Japan and the continuation process of continuous improvement. I think that's the road we are on. When it comes to incentives, well, yeah, well, that's that offers a lot of room for discussion. Whom do you want to incentivize to do what? I think. Sorry. Resource adequacy, not generation adequacy. okay, but we're talking. I'm very much an infrastructure guy, so maybe these fine tunings, I thought that's a different thing now. Well, it's a question of how to incentivize. I mean, Leszek probably would say we would need the capacity markets or auctions. There are different ways. I cannot answer that for the Commission because I think there are different train of thoughts in that. I personally see it very, very positive that we have the energy markets which become more and more flexible and that actual reward price differences and entrepreneurship. And as with ETS, I would build on these incentives, but I would not rule out that no, I would actually expect that this is not sufficient, so that there are further incentives needed. But this is on a case-by-case basis, more or less.
Let me maybe intervene here. There was always this question of having an interconnection target, and that's been, since the beginning of this century, in fact, and it's been a target that we've been sort of running after for years and years. What was the end game with the clean energy package? Did we sort of get rid of this interconnection target? I think it used to be 15%. Is it still 15? But do we have? I mean, is there anything like to make?
Well, it was 10%, and we got rid of the 10% and replaced it with 15%.
A different definition.
But with a different definition. And I think what we had the expert group on the interconnection target, who concluded with a report and gave recommendations on how to define those 15%. Because that's the question. I mean, with more and more variable renewables, you have a lot of installed generation. Installed generation was the metrics of choice at the time, but now it's probably not the right metric anymore, because then we would need to build interconnections like crazy. Yeah.
Is that something the member states are really committed to? Because, I mean, frankly, it's been dragging on for 20 years, or maybe more. Isabelle, Pascal Fonck.
I must admit I don't know exactly what is the use of that member states are doing from this of this number. I would say that as TSOs, usually we do not like having fixed targets like that. It is the same than the 70%. We do not like to have fixed numbers in regulation and so on. But what we see clearly is that, of course, it was not tackled in the clean energy package because that was not the topic of this package. Maybe it will come back in future regulation. But what we see on grid development is that it is really a no-regret option to go on developing the transmission grids in order to allow the renewable energy to be integrated in the system. We have several months ago, I think it was 1 year ago, done a study which I want to cite a few numbers. We have compared the cost of building no grid in comparison with building what was in our 10-year network development plan. And what we can show is that if we do not build the transmission grids we have in our plans, this would lead to an extra cost of about 40 billion euros per year at European level, and this would block the integration of 150 terawatt-hour per year of renewable energy.
That's cross-border included, or is
it is everything at the level of transmission projects, at least the ones which are taken in our TYNDP. So this is a publication that you can have a look at, and we believe it is quite important. It is one of the cornerstones of let's say, the development of the market. This is something that we work on. This requires huge investments, so huge efforts by TSOs, and we are working on this, including the concerns that I have explained on public acceptance in order to have it done.
To stay with you maybe for a few more minutes, There was this issue being raised during the discussions on the clean energy package about the methodologies to calculate the adequacy assessments, which are different from one country to the other. So have we made progress now in finding a harmonized method to calculate this? Can you tell us what's happening there?
What was happening already before the clean energy package was that as ENTSO-E, we were in charge of doing medium-term adequacy forecasts, and we are also doing seasonal outlooks, winter and summer outlooks. And so we had a view on prognosis, forecasts of generation and consumption in each country, and trying to trigger alarm bells in case we would see an issue. So it was before. Now in the clean energy package, the issue of resource adequacy, because it is named like that, is taken in the package. I think that resource is referring to generation, but also demand side, which could contribute to the thing. And there the idea was to go for more, let's say, harmonized methodologies at European level and harmonized assessments. In the final version of the package, we find something that we believe is wise, which is to say there would be a European assessment of adequacy, but this can be complemented by national assessments, especially when member states want to put in place a capacity remuneration mechanism or something in that spirit. And so, as ENTSO-E, we have been tasked to develop several methodologies in that field, methodology for the assessment, but also for several parameters in the way the assessment will be done. We are not ready yet, but the package has not yet entered into force. But for sure, it will be something going in the direction of a harmonization, but still a rather strong input to be given by member states and by, let's say, actors at national level. So we are working on this, and this is one important move in the package regarding resource adequacy.
So the timeline for that, can you give more detail?
6 months after the entry into force of the package.
Right, so a new era starting when these new methodologies come into force. Sebastian Grass, yeah, maybe for a few concluding words.
No, concluding words, but I want to answer on the question if the interconnection target is being taken serious by the membership, because I really think it is. First of all, it developed not only from 10% to 15%, but it gets a new quality. It gets a new quality with the recommendations for how to calculate them, but they also materialize because we look at them when we do the selection of project of common interest, and there we have more and more electricity projects coming forward, contributing to the interconnection target of each member states. In many cases, there are also internal lines, and compared to that, we have less gas projects coming forward. So there's definitely a shift. We also have from ENTSO-E, when we select them, we have the maps that show what kind of network development does lead to which interconnection increase, and sometimes it goes pretty fast for small member states. I mean, one interconnector and you have a lot of interconnection percentage-wise. So I think there's really, on the interconnection basis, there's really happening a lot between the member states, and that is completely in line with what the treaty demands, and therefore I want to say yes, the member states and the TSOs take it very seriously.
Maybe a few concluding words. Yes, go ahead.
Short remark, perhaps, on the investment incentives. As Sebastian was thinking, yes, I would argue for the for the capacity markets, provided that this is a market-based approach. It's not a market when we have mechanisms for remuneration, as the Commission defines them. The way we have argued in Poland was that we should have it as market-based as possible, with participation of, neutrality towards technology, which is the incentive for from any transmission system point of view, because we are neutral to the generators. So when we have these three things combined, being the neutrality towards technology, participation from across the border, so from the external capacities, and the demand side response as a negative kind of capacity, then we can, and all three can compete for the money on auction base. Then we have the market, and this is exactly what's happening. So it's we think this is going to be really an incentive for neutral investments. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll end this event here. We're right on time. It's 7 p.m. Thanks to all of you for coming. For sure, we as Euractiv will be very interested to see how further developments are happening on the electricity market, including the 15% interconnection target, and also harmonization, because these are things which indeed help bring things forward very much. So thanks again to all of you for coming today. There's a cocktail being served outside, so please feel free to stay on and enjoy a few drinks. And one last thing before you leave your seats, there's a folder that's which is in your hand for most of you. There's a feedback form inside there. If you could take just 1 or 2 minutes to complete that, it would be for us very useful. We always love to receive feedbacks about our events. Thank you very much. And now the cocktail is opening just outside. Thank you.